People were living in houses with lavatories in the yard, sometimes shared lavatories in the yard. People without bathrooms. People with one room and a kitchen, a scullery, not a kitchen downstairs. So they were living in very deprived situations. They were living in houses which were bad houses when they were built in 1850. So what they were like in 1960 is only to be imagined. The idea was not only should it be a better house, it would be a super housing condition. I mean, things people didn't dream of. Not just a new house and windows and doors and a bathroom, but things like refuse disposal. People were delighted to show you could put bottles down a hole in the sink and they disappeared. Things like the laundrettes on each landing, things like a school down visible from the deck so you could watch your children going to school safely. I think there were three reasons Park Hill was built as it was. One was we were short of building land on which you could build traditional houses. We had to build on slopes, into slopes. And Park Hill was almost designed, and it is designed, low at one end, high at the other to accommodate difficult terrain. The second, we thought, I think rightly at the time, that we could recreate the best spirit of the old slums, the old back houses, the old terraces, the community spirit. And thirdly, we had some young architects who wanted to make a mark, and Park Hill was one of the ways of doing it. And nobody talks about brutalism because we didn't use big words like that. I'm sure the word utopia was never used. We never thought of it ourselves as utopians. Utopia is unachievable. Park Hill was achieved, and that's the important thing about it. Womersley was the architect, and his team were very anxious sociologically to be part of the process, to know the people. I shouldn't think that Womersley had ever met a man living in a terraced house in his life until he went to university, but he wanted to understand them, and he, admirably. I mean, I'm regarding this as very much to his credit. And I remember the architect saying, we're going to have gutsy concrete. None of us knew quite what that meant. What it turned out to mean was the boards against which the concrete was poured had their grains still visible. Sensible working men realised that a rough surface on the outside would attract muck, which indeed it did. But the architect wanted gutsy concrete, so gutsy concrete we had. So there were little arguments of that sort, with the council always being on the side of practicality, and the architect always being on the side of concept. The years of chairman of housing were the happiest years of my very long political life because you could see things actually maturing. One month you decide to clear some slums. A couple of months later you put out contracts for the building. And before you knew where you were, a year, 18 months later, you were handing over the key to the new occupants. And to see it working is something politicians very rarely enjoy. So I enjoyed the housing department immensely. It was very controversial. Park Hill was controversial. I mean, the great arguments about whether it should be built in that form at all, with some members of the council, Labour members of the council, saying what we want, what the workers want, what working class people want, are workers' cottages with a bit of a garden. But they were overruled in Park Hill, and a very modernistic and very controversial building resulted.
I think Sheffield Council probably wanted to demolish it. English Heritage came along and actually listed it, so that no longer became an option. And so then they had a competition to find a development partner, and we were fortunate enough to win that. So I suppose we're sort of midway through the process of developing Park Hill. We've done the biggest, the hardest block. We're getting that full. It's getting a real sense of momentum, yet there's still actually quite a bit more to come. Half of it is finished with this bright and in some people's mind a bit garish, in other people's mind very colourful new cladding, and the rest of it is actually left as it is.
It's in a strange place, I'd say, at the moment, because it's kind of the very beginning of the revival, isn't it? And there's not all the stuff here which you really want it to be this kind of vibrant city quarter that the aspirations for it to be are.
It's particularly nice because there is this contrast, because there is the new part, the colourful, the plastic, and it contrasts very, very interestingly with this old, dilapidated record of the dream of the 1950s.
It's not just history, and the project of Urban Splash emphasizes the fact that it's not just history, it's a kind of a reinvented history, reclaimed for future use. But it's still very much the same set of ideas.
It was meant to be like a revolutionary place to live with all the mod cons and a wonderful community place as well. It says something about former times, actually. It's a link to the past in a way.
The idea that one day we would be able to live as a society, different kinds of people live together in vast sunny spaces, and there is lots of hope in this kind of architecture.
It is like the sort of preeminent achievement of when Sheffield was doing all that pretty amazing stuff back in the sort of to late 20th century, post-war era, when they were trying to make it a modern city. And to actually have erased this would have been like, we got rid of the hole in the road, which I think everyone would think was pretty cool these days.
We liked it immediately the moment we saw it. It's because of the ethos of the place, which really speaks to us, the architecture, and its history. We've seen films about Park Hill, the streets in the sky.
It was the time when Sheffield was really trying to up its game, and it's very unfortunate that Sheffield's been very good at kind of trying to raise all that effort. But it took on a lot of ideas which were being developed in the 50s about a different approach, and this kind of streets in the sky approach, where you're actually making the building longer, and a sort of network of streets which wrap around external spaces like this was the innovative idea, which no one else had really done before. It was like an architecture where you didn't really think about what it looked like anymore, which is pretty radical.
Our hope was that it would become the thriving place that it had been previously, and we were very hopeful that there would, be a busy vibe about it, and that we would, there would be shops and places that would make it a community as it used to be.
The community element of it wasn't central to my decision to live here, so it was always just a little peripheral issue, and I had great hopes for it. And I think I still do, but my expectations have come down.
Well, it's not just these kinds of buildings. I think it's just generally people don't necessarily have that much of a connection with their neighbours anymore, do they?
I think that there is an emerging community here. We know some of the people living here. We've visited some of the people living here.
If social cohesion doesn't work, either people just aren't conversing with each other or it actually goes bad. That's something which is kind of above and beyond physical constraints, I think. Although architecture can influence that.
We know a few of our neighbours. We've met a couple of them. We've been out with some. We've also met with some of them in the sculpture part for a couple of drinks and a chat. So, yeah, it's got a nice community feel. Probably not as big as what it used to have before, but I think as time goes by, that community feel will come back and get a lot closer.
Living in Park Hill feels modern. It feels cutting edge, I would say, because it is still, half of it's still a building site. You feel very proud to be able to say that you live in this, very, as I said, iconic building.
I don't feel like a pioneer living here, and I'm also very conscious of the fact that there's been pioneers here before me.
I have a distinct memory of looking at some websites and saying in a more categorical way than I usually do, this is where we're going to live.
I just love the feel of it, like living in the city centre. I always thought that I would want to live like in the suburbs, be like white picket fence, nice garden. But ever since we've came here, the love has grown for it.
It's a place where you can believe that we will once again reconnect to those big dreams.
The way I structure my days and my non-working time, even my getting to and from work, are different now. And because, again, I suppose because of the yoga, but that comes from having the space and because of the light, the mindset to do it. So yes, living here has definitely changed my life.
It makes me feel younger. I don't know if it's, going into the city or whether it is the modern surroundings that you live in. Yeah, it makes me, I feel a stronger, younger, more vibrant person.
Yeah, it has changed how I sort of perceive myself and where I live, because I suppose so much about yourself is wrapped up in the place that you live in, the place where you spend your time, where you go, that kind of thing. So it's definitely changed how I see myself.
Whether it's a matter of being able to express ideas which I've been nursing and developing about myself for some time, or whether it's actually changing me, I don't know.
Apart from sort of the functional, like the kitchen, the bathroom and the bedroom, the two spaces are just the living space and the yoga room. And I've thought about, and my friends have asked me, which do you prefer, which would you get rid of? And I'd have to keep this room because this is where I eat and read, whereas the yoga room is only where I do yoga. But I'm happy for the moment that I've got both. And I know I could live without the yoga room because I could just put a mat here and I've still got the same aspect.
We like the care taken in designing all the small features in the building, all the design of radiators, the kitchen, the lifts and all that. We love the exposed concrete.
The large windows enhance the views, that's for sure. And I like light very much. So you get a lot of light. The views are more, they move inside into the flat. They are not outside, out there. They are part of your everyday life.
Definitely the view was a big selling point. I got a marvellous view of the city out there. The new floor-to-ceiling windows, they're very, very smart. They didn't have them in the old flats. They had sort of kind of like partly wooden panelling, with smaller panes, like sort of big pane in the top, and an ordinary door that sort of opened outwards.
When I first bought it and when I first moved in, I loved the fact that it was just a complete blank canvas, just sort of off-white walls, exposed concrete, beautifully finished. Everything was immaculate.
I'm always drawn to the corner that we have over there with the sofa bed. You can open the door to the little balcony, and I like to sort of look out on that with my bits and bobs of flowers or whatever else I've got out there.
And the first thing I bought, I had that table, that's it, would have been, so I bought some chairs, and I really thought about what I wanted to do with the space. But a lot of the little bits, the little coffee tables, blanket chests, things like that, all did come from when I was downsizing from my big family home. And some elements like that old dresser that I've got there, I knew without the top on, it would probably be fine against that concrete wall, so I've tried to bring the two together.
We moved in from a smaller apartment, but had a double bed and a triple seat sofa that we were trying to get in. And unfortunately, we got as far as the lobby and discovered there that neither the bed nor the sofa would fit into the lift.
Lift going up.
In the whole of the old flats, there were a couple of very large cargo lifts, you know, handy for moving large items. At the moment, you know, we've only got these fairly small passenger lifts, but I reckon they'll probably be including a cargo lift in one of the later phases.
Living in this space, this flat in Park Hill, has made a tremendous difference to my style of furnishings, my habits of hoarding and saving stuff. Practically everything that we had in the house, the 3-bedroomed house, just went.
I really like concrete, I must say. I really like it. It's to me a kind of a feminine building material. It's like bronze. You can make different shapes.
It's one of the things they very much had to do was preserve the concrete frame. But what they didn't have to do, but they've chosen to do, is to expose all this stuff on the inside. And the interesting thing about that, of course, is that none of this was ever apparent before. This is something that's been brought in as a kind of style element now.
You've got things like old plug fixtures and you know, bits and bobs like stuck into the concrete. So every concrete slab looks different in all the flats that you go into.
I like the kind of texture of it as well. You've got these exposed pebbles and things like that from the aggregate.
Concrete emphasizes the fact that this is indeed a sculpture, not just some buildings.
You've got like the birch ply facing to the flats, which does those little bays, which are the full width of the street every time you get to like each bunch of 4 flats. But then in between it's narrower, so it's less of a street, I suppose, isn't it? It's more of a, yeah, the other word for these things is deck access. It's more of a deck. In fact, it actually looks very much like the sort of thing on a ship. I think whoever designed this has been thinking about that, subconsciously or not. It kind of harks back to all these kind of classic modern architecture reference points again.
I really, really, truly hope that more permanent people like myself will live here. People who see this as a choice. People like myself, I really, really want to live here. I really want to give something to this community. I really value the space.
I'd like to see something started on the old blocks that are yet to be refurbished. I would hope that we have got some kind of coffee shop downstairs or something where, you know, you can meet more people. So I'm hoping that it just becomes a little bit more lively.
When it comes to its completion date, nothing is very certain. I mean, they said, I think 10 years ago when they first started developing it in 2005, it would be completed by, I think, 2018. And obviously that's not going to happen.
I wouldn't mind at all if the university moved in here. Parts of the, I don't know, Sheffield University or Sheffield Hallam or perhaps both. I've heard about the departments of architecture of both universities having some ideas of moving in, and that would be great.
We have the Scottish Queen, the gallery, that's been recently opened, but I would have liked some sort of a cafe. I am hoping that there will be some small grocery store available on site in a few years.
This looks a smaller slice of Park Hill than it really is, because this is the biggest bit, of course. Anecdotally, they always used to call it the kind of posh end up the very top, where you've got the buildings which are about the same size as normal houses. You get up there, it's not as many stories, and so presumably it won't take as long to do. But it does look a bit sad. But at the same time, when you see the sun on it in a certain way, you actually, all the original brick infill and things, it still kind of makes sense and looks good, I think.